Good morning, brothers and sisters. As we continue our study in Judges 8, shall we ask our Heavenly Father for his guidance and his blessing and strength for this day? Shall we pray? Gracious Father in heaven, as we open your word before us, we see more and more our great need of you. It is from you that all blessings come. It is from you that our strength and our wisdom are derived. Help us as we open this word. Direct us today as we study together. May our minds be open to consider thoughts, to consider things that we have not seen before in these examples that are going to be before us. Help us now. I thank you for each one that are choosing to set time aside for these studies this morning. I thank you for those that will listen later. Help us each now to consider carefully the examples that will be before us, and help us that these may be applied within our lives and within the movement with all that is ongoing. We have need of your angels. We have great need of your spirit. We ask, Father, that they be sent so that our minds may be clear and focused upon that which we need to understand for this time in Earth's history. Be with us now. Direct us, we ask. In Jesus' name we thank you. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Now, as we were wrapping some things up yesterday, we had before us that Gideon took the elders of the city of Succoth and thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them he taught the men of Succoth, or he made to know the men of Succoth. These are the men that refused Gideon's request to provide bread for the army. Now we understand that the bread was to sustain the body, but what is the symbol of the bread that the men of Succoth withheld?
Christ, the bread of life.
Okay, we can apply it as Christ, the bread of life, but why are the men of Succoth choosing to withhold this from Gideon's army? Don't they understand?
Compared to the mainstream, if we compare it to the mainstream church, it's like they look at us as an offshoot and persona non grata almost in
Okay.
some cases.
Well, we were applying this initially with the Midianites as being more the mainstream church. What do the men of Succoth represent if the Midianites are the mainstream church?
Is it possible they could be then, if they're not the mainstream church, other so-called independent ministries?
Well, the men of Succoth were part of the area that Gideon called when he went against the Midianites, the Amalekites, and the children of the east. Now, we have made the application figuratively of the Midianites being the corporate church. Would we then look that the Amalekites would be the Protestants and that the children of the east, of course, being Islam? If that's the case, would then this, with the men of Sukkoth and the men of Penuel, the men of the face of God, have had something to do with the movement? But these are the ones that are choosing not to accept Gideon's leadership or to accept Gideon's message.
Yeah, so I would take that latter interpretation as probably the most likely correct.
That the men of Sukkoth had something to do with the movement at some point, but they choose not to accept the message.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we come here again, where Gideon beats down the tower of the face of God and slew the men of the city. So he slays the men of Penuel. And as a figure, doesn't this message slay those that had been the closest within FFA?
Yeah, and of course the verse in reverse is July 18.
Okay.
Right.
How do we show that?
Well, 718, 817.
Right.
Yeah. So
we have
specifically the message of July 18th that is in opposition to these men of Penuel.
Well, this is why the symbolism is so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is not Elder Jeff that stood against the message of July 18th,
Mm-hmm.
or the message that came subsequent to July 18th.
Correct.
So when the tower is beaten down, the tower of the face of God, the symbol is showing that those that are, to me, that this is an opinion, so feel free to disagree with it, but it's like saying that the leadership that rejected the message of July 18th is now being set aside.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as we pick up the study where we left off yesterday, then said Gideon unto Zebah and Zalmunna, what manner of men were they whom ye slew at Tabor? And they answered, as thou art, so were they. Each one resembled the children of a king, or each one were according to the form of the children of a king. When we look at this portion, when we look at this verse, Zebah and Zalmunna are recognizing that those that they slew were presenting before them the character of a king. Why is this important for us to know?
Well, I'm not sure if I understand exactly what this verse is talking about, what it's referring to. Because at Mount Tabor, so who are they talking about that they slew?
Well, Mount Tabor,
So that's Judges chapter 4.
right? But we're also speaking here of what was occurring during the time of Deborah and Barak.
Yeah, right. So it's, Judges 4 during Deborah and Barak.
Now, when we're looking at this with Tabor, Tabor is seen as being, according to its translation, a broken region.
Yeah.
So Zeba and Zalmunna took part in the attack that led to the victory of Deborah and Barak.
Hmm.
How would you see this? Because Gideon's asking the question, what sort of men were these?
Okay, so Gideon conquers Zeba and Zalmunna, and they
Right.
were also at Mount Tabor in the story of Deborah and Barak.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, because that's what he's asking them. And so they are going to have killed some of those. Of the 10,000 that came in that.
Bless you.
So some of the 10,000 that came in that battle, is that what that's talking about?
I would have to assume so.
Okay. Yeah, it's just kind of, to me, it's odd that it jumps out here. Okay, so I'm not sure how to make sense out of this.
Well, okay, we've got in this, prior to the emergence of Deborah and Barak, we have Jabin, the king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor, who's the captain of whose host was Sisera.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we have the command where Deborah gives the advice in Judges 4:6, and she sent and called Barak the son of Abinoam out of Kadesh Naphtali, and said unto him, hath not the Lord God of Israel commanded, saying, go and draw toward Mount Tabor, and take with thee 10,000 men of the children of Naphtali and the children of Zebulun?
Right. So this is saying then in Judges 8:18 that so Gideon's asking them. So he's saying that they were there. I mean, at that battle at Mount Tabor.
Exactly.
Okay, but I guess he would have known that for some reason that the Bible doesn't show, other than here. This is the first we hear of it, that they were there.
So
Zeba and Zalmunna we're taking as being, of course, not people in the movement or anything like that. This is some kind of message.
right.
And so this is going back to the story, which we have understood has to do with Parminder.
Right.
So that means Zeba and Zalmunna here, who are going to be conquered by Gideon
Right.
there are people in the movement, or there's a part of the movement, whatever you want to look at it, that doesn't support them in going to capture them. Right? So there is some error that has been dogging the movement, let's say, that now is going to be addressed by this July 18th prediction.
Right.
And that error had been responsible for slaying some of those that were supportive of the opposition towards Parminder's error. Does that make sense? I didn't say very well, but maybe somebody else could-
It's got a level of logic to it.
Okay. So, I mean, this is still a continuation of this. So Gideon's message, though, is the message after July 18th, but it's connected to July 18th.
Very definitely.
And so what could we say was the message after July 18th? I mean, what happened after July 18th? Specifically, that would be related to a message that we could line up with Gideon. I mean,
Well,
what was the error? What is the message?
neither Sukkoth nor Penuel wish to offer any of their bread.
Mm-hmm. Which really would be assistance or support
There you go.
in this context. I mean, from my perspective, just from a plain, understanding of what's happened since July 18th, definitely the work that's being done in these studies has not been supported by either the American group or the Canadian group.
Ziba and Zalmunna.
Yeah. So, I mean, it could represent that, but that's a pretty direct sort of application.
Well, at this point, I think we're going to have to look at this in a direct manner. And then if anyone else has some other recommendations or suggestions, then let's consider those as well.
Mm-hmm.
But at this point, we have the men of Penuel, we have the elders of Sukkoth that have refused sustenance, have refused support. Now we have Ziba and Zalmunna being identified, being revealed as having been at Mount Tabor.
But in this case, they would end up being the enemies that existed, because these are messages. But we're saying, okay, it's the American and Canadian group. I don't know if we can make that application, but we were taking them as messages that it existed during Parminder's apostasy.
Okay, so of the messages that existed during Parminder's apostasy, one of those messages is that you should not trust certain people.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. But it's also, I would look at it as the opposition to the use of numbers. So they would categorize the way that we were using numbers as numerology or something like that, some kind of magic.
Correct.
So there was opposition to July 18th and all the ways. So even though they used numbers to a point, at a certain point they just stopped, and then they eventually rejected the entire use of numbers. Right? So they wanted to use them for the November 9th, 2019 prediction, but nothing beyond that. And even after that, it seems that they've rejected that. I mean, their basic time setting, they seem to have rejected. It just seems kind of odd. But But I would say the part of the thing that, because if you're dealing with Zalmunna, which means shade has been denied, right? So the rejection of any kind of support. I mean, I still think it's this attack of, as you're saying, the attack of individuals, but it's just that anything that did not come from Parminder and Tess was just dismissed. But we saw that the seed that they had planted still continued. That is, many people still took the same position that Parminder and Tess had held, even though they continued in the movement. That is, people rejected the symbolic use of numbers. I don't know. I just don't know how we get Ziba and Zalmunna, because these are part of the enemy, right? So this is part of the enemy. But you also have Sukkoth and Penuel as they're not part of the enemy, but they're not supporting the message. So in a sense, Sukkoth and Penuel are tied to Ziba and Zalmunna.
No,
Even though they're two different groups, they're still tied to the same symbol.
aren't Ziba and Zalmunna considered as princes of the Midianites?
Yeah.
So Ziba and Zalmunna can be interrelated with Parminder and Tess,
Right.
but they also have to be interrelated then with the corporate church.
Well,
The messages.
yeah, the messages. I mean, we can see that definitely that the message of Parminder and Tess is the message of liberal Adventism.
Okay.
But we also have Sukkoth and Penuel, right? So in a sense, Sukkoth and Penuel represent these two groups, just like Ziba and Zalmunna do. And really, they're the same thing, in the sense that they're the same message. By rejecting, because if we look at what Zalmunna means, which means to basically deny shade, right?
Correct.
That's exactly what Sukkoth and Penuel did. So Ziba and Zalmunna, the symbols of them are reflected in the actions of Sukkoth and Penuel. Does that make sense? That they're parallel to each other. They're an illustration of the same thing. One looks internal, Sukkoth and Penuel. The other one looks external, in a sense. But they're in perfect agreement with each other. By not supporting the attack on this message, this false message of Parminder's, you're actually partaking in it.
All right.
I don't know if anybody has another way to express it.
We know there's no neutrality.
Yeah, what's the statement in the Spirit of Prophecy regarding neutrality?
I don't know it by heart, but I've read it a few times.
Yeah, I just can't think of how it's worded.
Yeah, she's very emphatic. There is no neutrality. And basically, I mean, if you're not standing for truth, you're standing for falsehood.
Yeah, but there's a famous statement, Jeff would always quote it.
I know.
About a crisis or something like that. I can't remember the statement. Somebody must remember it.
Well, maybe somebody can find it in the next day or so.
Yeah.
So why is it necessary for us to view what Zeba and Zalmunna have done, noting that those that they slew at Tabor were according to the form of the children of a king? Is this saying that the message that they destroyed or that they set aside at Mount Tabor was a message from God?
Well, yeah.
So Gideon continues, and he said, "They were my brethren, even the sons of my mother. As the Lord liveth, if ye had saved them alive, I would not slay you." So Gideon is recognizing those that were at Tabor were part of a righteous message,
Mhm.
and that Zeba and Zalmunna, being part of the Midianites, rejected a message that they should have accepted.
Mhm.
Now, the messages that we have seen that have been rejected primarily have had to do with the 7 times and now with July 18th.
Mhm. And the way that the messages were rejected was never, no one ever went through a logical understanding of things. That's the thing that bothered me the most always. Whenever I see somebody reject something, but they never actually address the points being made, or if they do, they take them out of context and distort them, right? They twist the words of the person who's presenting something, taking out of it its actual meaning or significance. So one of the things we saw with the December 6th declaration is a complete rejection of the arguments that I was making about July 18th and about time setting. And in order to attack what we were doing, they basically, first they had to attack the person, but they also had to completely ignore all of the arguments. They had to set up straw man arguments and attack those. But also in doing so, they were shooting themselves in their own foot. They're shooting themselves in the foot because they ended up having to reject basically the entire message that Jeff had given ever since he began presenting. So they were condemning themselves.
All right, any other examples or thoughts? Gideon is saying to them, he is going to slay them. He is going to put an end to their message. Okay, now in the chat, there's a comment. I'm not sure I understand it.
What, the 5 SDA Bible commentary?
Right.
Yeah, so that's just, I think she's probably having us look at page 1093.
Yeah, I have it here. I had to open up my other computer. It says, Christ shows that there can be no such thing as neutrality in his service. The soul must not be satisfied with anything short of entire consecration. Consecration of thought, voice, spirit, and every organ of mind and body. It is not enough that the vessel be emptied, it must be filled with the grace of Christ. So she's commenting on Luke 11. And yeah, it just shows how despicable self-righteousness is.
Well, the
I mean,
quote,
there's a whole bunch of quotes. We could probably go through them all, but some other time.
the quote that I'm thinking
Sorry.
of comes from Third Testimonies.
Okay,
It's the one that says, indifference and neutrality in a religious crisis is regarded of God as a grievous crime and equal to the very worst type of hostility toward God. Right. So the whole paragraph starts, what astonishing deception and fearful blindness had, like a dark cloud, covered itself, or covered Israel, pardon me. This blindness and apostasy had not closed about them suddenly. It had come upon them gradually, as they had not heeded the word of reproof and warning which the Lord had sent to them because of their pride and their sins. And now, in this fearful crisis, in the presence of the idolatrous priest and the apostate king, they remain neutral. If God abhors one sin above another, of which his people are guilty, it is doing nothing in case of an emergency.
yeah,
Indifference and neutrality
that's the one I
in
was
a
thinking.
religious crisis is regarded of God as a grievous crime and equal to the very worst type of hostility against God. So that's the one I'm thinking of. And this is dealing with, of course, Elijah, right, at
Carmel.
Mount Carmel here. So
So that's 3T what?
it starts on page 280. It's the last
Okay,
paragraph,
thank you.
280. But yeah, so that's the one that Jeff had always quoted. And this is part of what I've seen, in that there are people who say, well, I understand what's happening. I see how you're being treated, but I'm not going to stand with you. I've had that basically stated to me because they believe they would lose their influence in so doing.
Well, that's just plain cowardice. And Jesus said, if you try to save your life, you're going to lose it. So if they're trying to save some cloak of whatever, they're going to be bereft. And I think, when it says deprived of shade or denied of shade, I'm thinking of their spiritual condition more than what they're denying to anybody else who's in need of help.
Well, since you've brought this manuscript up, a thought and a recommendation. I'm going to read to you paragraph number 6. And I think this goes very much in line with what we're looking at right now symbolically within this in Judges. Every person enlightened by the truth must represent Christ. He is to be formed within the hope of glory. Man cannot accept the righteousness of Christ to be a living, abiding principle in the soul unless it transforms the entire character. He must eat the flesh and drink the blood of the Son of God, which is eternal life to all who receive it. Those who are convinced that Jesus is the Christ and are converted to God must understand that they are to use all their powers in cooperating with their Redeemer. They are to wear his yoke. The man in whose heart Christ is abiding by faith must understand that he is privileged in being in such blessed companionship. Now, in this point, those that would choose not to stand with a brother or a sister that is taking a position that others may find as untenable, without investigating this position are not showing the character of Christ. They are taking the name of Christ in vain. If you break one commandment, you break them all. The situation that we're dealing with here, as far as this message, as far as these examples here in Judges 8, we have a group of symbolic messages, whether they came from Parminder and Tess, whether they came from the church itself, whether they came from others in the movement. We have been observing that first, the church chose that anything that was coming through Future for America should be set aside because they weren't agreeing with the positions that were being taken. Now we have the situation with Parminder and Tess as being representative of the liberal side of the corporate church. Now we have those that have been in the movement, the men of Penuel, the men of Sukkoth, that are also choosing not to provide sustenance, symbolically withholding their support. Years ago, there were quite a number of presentations that Duane Dewey gave.
The desolation of Jerusalem.
Yes, specifically.
Yeah.
That were very much on point. But toward the end of his life, he had rejected the positions that Elder Jeff was taking.
Mm-hmm.
He did a series of presentations to show that in his mind, Elder Jeff was in the wrong. And that the message was not a correct message. He withheld his support.
Mm-hmm.
There are other examples of this and of these types of messages that we can apply in this situation, whether it be of that of Penuel or if it be that of Sukkoth.
Yeah, well, I mean, Duane Dewey's situations are rather complicated because in some ways he was correct. But I think for the wrong reasons. That is, to a large degree, it was more jealousy on his part. Me judging another person's motives, of course, doesn't mean anything. But, I mean, he knew that Parminder was teaching a wrong message, but I don't think Duane went about it in the correct way. That is, a lot of it was sort of done behind the scenes rather than directly. And which I think is the big problem. So we may think that somebody's in error, but if we're going to address error, we need to do it openly and not in some covert manner. That is, we can't gather people around us and work behind the scenes to try to undo error.
Right.
It has to be addressed directly. And I think that was the mistake that was being done, just from my human perspective and limited understanding, with Duane Dewey and Tanya Beeman in their opposition to Parminder. That this should have been done differently. But, that's just me looking at it from the outside, not knowing what actually went on. But I think the results, the fruit of what occurred, I think would be a testimony to that fact. That is, if a person is doing things for the right reason, they would act differently than if they're doing things for the wrong reason. You can do right things for the wrong reason. You can take the correct position for the wrong reason. So it's something we always have to be careful about. We can be in the right, but we can be all wrong. So it's just, but there's something here too when we look at these next verses that we would have to understand in this
Right.
context.
So as we look at verse 8:20, and he said unto Jether, his firstborn, up and slay them. But the youth drew not his sword, for he feared, because he was yet a youth. Jether could not stand up to the message.
Mhm.
Now, the meaning of Jether is what?
Just hang on. Well, it would be either abundance.
Why would Strong's connect Jether with Jethro?
Well, because they're related. I mean, it's the
Would we apply the meaning of Jethro to that of Jether? I mean, my understanding has always been that Jethro is the friend of God.
means his excellence.
Okay.
That's what Jethro means. His excellence. And Jether means abundance or excellency. So it just is a different form of the same word. Just doesn't have the personal pronoun attached to it.
So Gideon, who is leading the army, tells his son to stand up to the message of Zeba and Zalmunna.
Yeah.
And he cannot draw the sword, for he is yet a youth,
Mm-hmm.
because he feared. I don't want to stand up to a message because I don't feel that I'm qualified.
Mm-hmm.
Have we ever heard that before?
Mm-hmm.
Have we ever observed that before?
Lots of times.
So what within this examination, to what could we apply Jether?
I don't know specifically, I mean, but it would be just in a general sense, those who are uncertain really about what, I mean, their authority to stand up to the leadership or whatever you want to call it, that they see, to a message that even if they see something wrong with it, they just don't feel that they're able to stand against it. But I don't know specifically.
Is Jether having trouble standing up to those that oppose the message of July 18th?
Yeah. And one of the things is, of course, the people who are opposing the message of July 18th presently in the movement don't do so openly or directly. That is, they don't have arguments against it. They generally attack the individuals, right? I mean, personally, you could see what happened with me. Nobody's ever going to discuss with me or try to have a discussion about these points. Instead, they're going to get upset when I ask questions. And then they're going to mock and misrepresent things that I've said or done and misrepresent me as a person. And so people are fearful to stand up against them because the same thing would happen to them, for one. Right? People are fearful about taking sides, so to speak. Not that there should be sides to take, but they're fearful of standing up for the truth. Because one is they are a little bit uncertain about it. Because it's not something that's open and clear cut. So I think that would be part of it. And that was part of the problem with Parminder's message too, is even though we could see problems with it, it wasn't clear cut. It was done in a subtle way. There was a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes that we knew nothing about. Because the message of Ziba and Zalmunna is a deceptive message.
Right. It's a message that takes people away from the main message, from the correct message.
Yeah. Now, we know also from the next verse that these ornaments that are about the camels' necks are these moon symbols, these crescents. Right?
Okay, so let's read this.
Yeah.
Then Ziba and Zalmunna said, "Rise thou and fall upon us, for as the man is, so is his strength." So the message is saying, if you're stronger than we are, and we recognize that the message is correct, then the message we have presented must go away. And Gideon arose and slew Ziba and Zalmunna and took away the ornaments that were on their camels' necks. And the alternate reading shows that to be ornaments like the moon.
Yeah.
So what do we see here? What other items can we see here?
Well, I'm not sure why Ziba and Zalmunna asked to be slain. I'm not sure what that symbol means. If that's what they're asking. Or
Well, it's
maybe
kind
we're challenging. I don't know.
It's interesting because the Hebrew number that is used there for the ornament is 7720.
Yeah.
It's a round pendant for the neck. It's a round tire like the moon.
Mm-hmm. Or even like a crescent as well. Some of the translations give.
Why would one call it like a crescent and the other a round ornament?
Well, because the crescent is round. It's curved, right?
It's curved. I agree
That's
with
the
you
idea.
there.
It doesn't mean it's a circle. It's round like the moon. The moon is a crescent. So that's the idea.
Okay. So the messages recognize, the messages that have been presented. It's recognizing that those messages must soon end. For
Okay.
as the man is, so is his strength.
So they're stating something true in this case.
Right. But here again, Gebura is a feminine passive participle, which is the same as Hebrew 1368.
Which word is that? You looking at?
Gebura, Hebrew 1369, strength.
Oh, okay.
So if this is spoken in the feminine, is this not a religious message or a message of with religious overtones?
I don't know. Why do you always do that when it's in the feminine? I mean, words are going to be in the masculine or feminine based upon their.
Because in English, the feminine and masculine are fairly cut and dried. In Hebrew, it's not so cut and dried,
Well, it depends on the type of word.
right? It
Strength is a feminine word,
does.
but this is talking about his strength, which is masculine.
Okay, but why is it saying his strength, masculine followed by a feminine passive participle?
Because the word strength is feminine.
Would this
So
then
I wouldn't make anything of it, is all I'm saying, in that sense. It's not a word that it's choosing to be feminine for some particular reason. It's always going to be feminine.
okay? So Gideon arises and he slays Zebah and Zalmunna. And he takes away these ornaments that were on the camels' necks. Why is it important for us to understand that Zebah and Zalmunna recognize the correctness of this message, and that the message then removes the symbols that are being shown as being the ornaments? I mean, the camels were part of the economy of the Midianites and of the children of the East. So if you're taking away the ornaments, are you taking away part of the representation of the Midianites and the children of the East? What are you removing?
It's almost like removing a trademark in a sense, like they're identifying marks. What comes to me is Revelation 6:16 too, said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. Like they're admitting your message is correct, but we can't accept it, or we refuse to accept it, so slay us. Like we just can't accept that because we've been inculcated with so much trash.
Yeah. Well, the word they're taken as they translated as removed or took away, I guess here. That word means to fetch, lay hold of, or seize. So it doesn't really mean to take away in the sense that we've had other words that mean take away. This one means to get, fetch, lay hold of, or seize. And also just dealing with that, the word strength there, it's actually the strength of a man is how you would translate it literally, not his strength. That is, it actually has the word man, and then it has the word strength, which is in the female singular noun.
A verse that comes to me too is the wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just. I don't know how it connects exactly, but that's what I'm thinking of.
Right. What other thoughts do we have here? The next subject break is Judges 8:22.
Mhm.
Then the men of Israel said unto Gideon, rule thou over us, both thou and thy son, and thy son's son also, for thou hast delivered us from the hand of Midian.
Okay, well, just go back to what we were talking about dealing with the ornaments.
Okay,
The ornaments which represent the moon would represent the calendars.
Is
Right.
Okay.
So these are in some ways being used by Zeba and Zalmunna in that they were using time, right? Parminder and Tess had time as part of their message. But these are now going to be seized by Gideon,
okay,
right? Which I would say is not going to be used correctly, because Parminder and Tess were using their time in a deceitful way. So that's what I understand. And of course, the camels. This is going to be referred to this story of Islam, right? And the moon itself also Islam.
I would agree.
Yeah. Okay. So I just thought we should finish that off.
It would not, I don't think it would be out of line to look at it that way.
Just another thought here. So one of the things, obviously, we know that Islam didn't attack Nashville,
Right,
but to some degree, the movement has ignored Islam. That is, when we're looking at all the things that's happening and all the different types of studies, the movement isn't particularly interested in discussing the point of Islam, its role, right? It sort of seems to have just faded into the darkness, so to speak. So, we're not talking about Islam and Bible prophecy very much in this movement that I see. But we can't ignore it, because that symbol continues to be there. And there was, a question I had asked in a study, and I don't know if it was yesterday's study, I think it was, but anyway, was commented on by Pat so you'll see it in, maybe it was Friday night study, and Pat commented on it. And, like, what is the crisis that's going to happen that's going to change things? I still think it's going to be Islam, not just some economic crash, that Islam is going to become a part of these end time events again. However that comes about, whether it is a nuclear attack, such as we predicted with Nashville, or some other way. But Islam in the news definitely has disappeared to a large degree. And so people who are just looking at the news, they're focused on the pandemic and all these different things, but are neglecting a major part of our message, which has to do with Islam. And as we understood before, Midnight and the Midnight Cry address Islam in the line dealing with the Levites. So just a thought there.
Okay.
So now we're going to come to this different section dealing with Gideon's ephod,
Right.
which we've studied before. I don't think we even really came to understand it, how it fit in.
Well, let's understand the basis before we get to this with the ephod.
Okay.
The men of Israel, those of the movement, said unto Gideon, rule thou over us, both thou and thy son's son also, for thou hast delivered us from the hand of Midian. Now, we studied earlier in the last books, the last chapters of this book, the situation where a priest is set up that was not a Levite.
Mm-hmm.
Gideon is being offered the kingship. He is being offered to become the ruler of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Not northern, not southern, but Israel. But we know that coming from the tribe of Manasseh, that you could have Gad, you could have Manasseh, you could have Reuben, you could have Ephraim, you could have others joining in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
So those of the movement have said unto the message represented by Gideon, rule thou over us, for thou hast delivered us from the hand of Midian. You have established us separately from the church. And Gideon said unto them, I will not rule over you, neither shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you.
Mm-hmm.
I keep looking at this as Miller's rules.
Okay. Yeah, so you interpret this then as people are looking to some authority to guide them, but Gideon is saying you got to follow Miller's rules.
Well, since we're applying this as messages and not people,
Right.
the only way that we're going to be able to deal with this as a message is to look at the message that came at the very beginning, and that's Miller's rules.
Mm-hmm.
And that Miller's rules should be part of our method and manner of study. It should be the message that we are holding on to truly come to an understanding of what the gospel really means. Because it would be through the application of Miller's rules that we would come to a full understanding of the first, second, and third angel's message and the message of the other angel. Now, does anyone have a problem with that statement?
Okay, so we know that Gideon represents a message,
Right,
but there's going to be a part of the message of July 18th that is going to go astray,
right.
right? Because that's what we're going to see happen here. We'll go on.
Well, and Gideon said unto them, I would desire a request of you that ye would give me every man the earrings of his prey. For they had golden earrings, because they were Ishmaelites. The Amalekites are not Ishmaelites. The Midianites are not Ishmaelites. The children of the east could very definitely be Ishmaelites. Do you see a different manner of approaching this?
Well,
Because this is the first introduction specifically of the Ishmaelites.
right. So you're going to have the Ishmaelites mentioned here, whether it's literally they are Ishmaelites or it's just symbolically they're Ishmaelites, if that makes sense.
Right.
I mean, because we know they're not Ishmaelites. They live in the same area.
But the Bible is stating because they were Ishmaelites.
Okay. Okay, so because the Midianites are called Ishmaelites because they were the sons of Keturah, and Keturah was Hagar, the mother of Ishmael. That makes sense.
Okay.
Genesis 37:25 and 37:28. Genesis 37:25. They sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels, bearing the spicery, the balm, and the myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. Right. And then verse 28, there passed by Midianites, merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. So here you can see Ishmaelites and Midianites are used interchangeably.
Or they're being combined. Right.
Right. Yeah, but they're just switching one to the other. They call them Ishmaelites, they call them Midianites, and then they call them Ishmaelites.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially given the light from Genesis 37:27.
Yeah.
Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh, and his brethren were content. So they're calling out Ishmaelites specifically in these verses, and now you have this crossover, this combination of Midianites and Ishmaelites. They're showing that the Midianites were merchants, and as such, as an Ishmaelite, they sold Joseph as you would a say, a piece of stoneware for 20 pieces of silver. So the golden earrings were identifying whether these are Midianites or Ishmaelites, but they're identifying them as some type of, let's say, merchant. So, and they answered, we will willingly give them. And they spread a garment and did cast therein every man the earrings of his prey. So is this some type of an offering? Is this some type of free will offering? What exactly are they doing here? Are they paying some kind of a tribute? Why would they so willingly give up these earrings, this gold?
I don't know.
What does the gold represent? I mean, Revelation 3, we're told to buy from him gold tried in fire.
Yeah, well, can represent character.
Well, especially since character is also represented by a garment. So they spread a garment. They spread out the character, and they cast every man the earrings of his prey.
Okay.
What should we be seeing here? I mean, we've got multiple symbols. We have those that have heard a message that are now willing to support Gideon, the Gideon message. They have now spread out a garment, and they have cast the earrings that were taken from the wrong message. They're casting in here the method of support, the method of economic support that had been withheld in the past. Does anyone have any other thoughts on this? What other considerations could we have? And the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,000 and 700 shekels of gold, beside ornaments and collars or sweet jewels and purple raiment that was on the kings of Midian, and beside the chains that were about their camels' necks. 1,700 shekels. Now, we were trying to establish a while back the weight of, I think we had the shekel of the sanctuary leading to the shekel of, or the talent of the temple. And we never really did address that, but we have here a number, 1,700 shekels of gold. How could we look at this point? How would we translate 1,700 shekels into a method or manner of measurement that we would understand today?
Well, that's because we're not really certain about how much a shekel weighs. There's different opinions.
Okay, there's different opinions, but which one could we make use of at this point that would fit within the narrative that we're looking at?
Well, I mean, because you can put it into grams. There's all different ways in which you could do it. I mean, sometimes you'll say that, a shekel is about 11 grams. I mean, if that is the case, 1,700 times 11 is 18720. But
Now, isn't that interesting?
something like that. Anyway, around there. It's just slightly over 11 grams. If you took 18720 and divided it by 1,700, you just get over 11 grams. But whether that's correct or not, that'd be 11.0117 grams. But nobody knows for certain, right? So, I mean, it could represent July 18, 2020 in some ways. I mean,
Okay, now,
it could be 18700, depends on how you look at it. But yeah, so 1,700 times 11 directly is 18700 grams, if that's what, so that's a symbol of July 18. Whether that's correct or not, I don't know.
okay,
I'm still working on understanding these weights and measures. But yeah, you're going to have all different kinds of opinions in different periods of time and how much, a shekel was. So there's not any sort of straight, direct way to demonstrate that.
okay, now one of the comments from the chat would present Proverbs 25:12 as an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold, so is a wise reprover upon an obedient ear. I'd have to think for a while as to that and how we tie this back in here with Judges 8:26.
So anyway, they have this 1,700 shekels of gold.
Right.
Now there's also, besides the ornaments, the collars, the purple raiment that was on the kings of Midian, besides the chains that were about the camel's neck. So he's going to make this ephod.
Well, the verse states, verse 827.
Yeah.
And Gideon made an ephod thereof and put it in his city, even in Ophrah. And all Israel went thither a whoring after it, which thing became a snare unto Gideon and to his house. So Gideon constructs an ephod. He takes the gold, he takes the jewels, because he wants this direct communication with God. And the people of his city go a whoring after it. In other words, they are lifting this up as something to worship, right?
Yeah. Now, the way that I apply this is I apply it to the prediction regarding the president of the United States, but that is, I would take it as Colin's prediction and also Adilio's prediction.
So you're applying the ephod in that manner.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Any thoughts or comments on what Theodore's just presented?
It could be that. I mean, if you want to be very, pinpointing something, but I think it's just holding up our own opinions above what God is showing us, or stylizing things. We can make that an idol.
And it's a rejection of Miller's rules. It's taking
Yes.
truth. It's taking a truth that we know to be true because it's been established, but then it's making an idol out of it. That is, it's making predictions. It's going against what we're actually being shown by the July 18th prediction. Because we see the same elements, in Colin's prediction and in Odilio's studies of the symbols of these numbers, which are correct. But the problem is the interpretation of them. Well, Oran there puts truth mixed with error. And I would say it's mostly truth. The error is in some ways fairly minor. It's going to cause a disappointment for those who put their trust in these predictions. But we've already been shown that we can't make predictions. And we need to accept that fact. We're supposed to be watching and waiting. We're supposed to be measuring the time. Because those are an objective witness to the truthfulness of our message. But once we enter into a prediction, we enter into an area that we are plainly shown that we can't do. We can't go there. Only after time has passed can we properly interpret the symbols. So that's the way I look at this ephod. Because it's
Well,
going
what
to be
about
what's that?
well, there was the Trump prediction.
Yeah.
We did predict that.
And we were correct.
Yes.
Right. So we need to understand that we were correct already. Because we understood what January 6th meant. And that we had to understand that that was in our line, just like the pandemic. It's something that existed within our line as a symbol. So we made predictions, but we didn't understand them completely. Right? So we know that, Jeff predicted the pandemic, for instance, and even the timing of it, though indirectly, because he at the time didn't know that we would take November 9th and July 18th and mark them as midnight in the midnight cry, right? But he put the pandemic between those two, and definitely that's where the pandemic lies, and especially in connection with Trump. So all those things were correct. But then we say, well, we weren't correct because Trump still has to be the last president again. So now we have to get him to become president again, which would basically be a denial that we were correct the first time. So,
Right.
so that's the way that because we don't seem to understand our own history when we try to put Trump as president again.
We're turning away from our own history.
Yeah. And even if Trump became president again, in 2024, he definitely is not going to be president in 2022. But even if he became president in 2024, it wouldn't be part of our prophecy because it would lie outside of the line that we were given. Right? Because our line ended December 25th, 2021. And Odilio really showed all of that in dealing with the pandemic. So it didn't make sense to look beyond that to 2022 and what's happening with Biden as anything to do with the Trump prediction or this midterm election or even the election after that. I just don't think that we've really understood the lessons that we were being taught when we start making more predictions.
Just concerning Odilio's study,
Yeah.
he had introduced the number 1,629.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is important.
And
Yeah.
I actually found out from when Ezekiel begins to prophesy the siege, the beginning of the 390 days lying on his left side,
Okay.
which is July 21st, 592. It's
Yeah.
actually 1,629 days then to when the siege actually begins.
Okay. Okay. So that's pretty fascinating. So what does that mean then? Because we have our understanding of the siege, right? That's the 10th day of the 10th month.
Yeah, well,
Right.
I thought about adding, because you have the 390 beginning then and you have the 1629. So if you add them together, it takes you to 2019. And so there you have the pandemic, which
Yeah.
should be representing the siege.
Okay. Yeah, and I would agree with
Possibly.
I would agree with that. So so I just want to show this to people because we're kind of a bit over time, but I just want to show this. So I'm gonna share my screen. Stop. How do I do this? Can you stop your share there, Dwight? Dwight,
Yeah.
stop your share.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll make this a little bit bigger. So we're looking at, so 592, we have to go to July 21st on the Julian calendar. That's going to be the 5th day of the 4th month. We have here on the Babylonian calendar, the 5th of Tammuz, because that's the calendar we're using actually in Ezekiel. And so then we're going to go, is it an inclusive count? No, it's just an ordinal count. Whoops, here, I'm going to get
Yes.
this here. Let's do this again, save. So the number of days, which is pretty fascinating. So the number of days then from when he begins his prophesying, that's Ezekiel 1, verse 1 and 2. it's going to be 1,629 days to the siege. So this is a number that Odilio derived from understanding the pandemic. Correct?
Yes,
And so it's definitely a valid symbol. But now you're going to have, from this date that the pandemic, or not the pandemic begins, but the date of the siege, you want to add 391. Is that what you said? What were you going to do here?
no.
Oh, okay.
From
So
when?
where are you going to
Yeah,
put
so
391?
well, I didn't say the 391, but I said you have the 390.
Oh,
That
390.
begins also. That begins also on that 21st of July.
Okay, so you're going to count on, yeah, so the 390 starts on the 21st of July. So
Yes.
we
So
go
if you
to,
had-
yeah,
So if you add both of them dates, both of them spans together,
that brings us to August 15th.
But is that August 15th of
No.
591?
Yeah, August 15th, 591. Yeah.
Okay.
So he starts on midnight, and then he's going to begin the 40 days on August 15th at the midnight cry, right? So that's something we already had understood. Oops, I did that twice.
Well, I'm asking only because you started that out in the 5th day of Tammuz of 592, Julian.
Right, so that's going to be 390 days.
Okay.
Is going to bring me 365 plus 25 days, right? There's 25 days between July 21st and August 15th in Millerite history.
Okay.
So we're just doing we're doing 365 plus 25 is 390. So that's why from midnight to the midnight cry in Ezekiel is 390 days instead of just 25 days. Right? Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay, so okay, so what else, Stephen?
yeah. So we had understood that. So just from that 21st of July as well, as I
Okay.
said, it's 1629 takes us to the beginning of the siege.
Right.
And so what I did was just, if you add 390
Yeah.
to 1629 is 2019.
Oh, so you're just adding the two numbers. So that's all. You're not putting them on the calendar
No,
per se.
no,
Okay.
just
Okay. Yeah, so it's just so we're just simply taking 1629 plus 390 equals 219. And that's going to bring us to 2019. Right? 1629 plus 390 equals 2019. Yeah. And that's going to fit in then with Odilio's starting the pandemic there in 2019 in November, right? And
Yes.
it also ties to November 19th, 2019. Or November 9th, 2019. Yeah, so we can see that this then is correct. So and that's the thing, is there's truth, because I see Odilio, I don't see him as some kind of apostate or anything like that. And same with Colin. I just see them as making a mistake in how they're interpreting things. Because these numbers are giving them this information, they then say, well, we must come to this conclusion. But the conclusion doesn't actually come from the information that they have. The conclusion is, in my view, not even logical. It's a denial of what we were actually being taught. So the numbers, in a sense, occur in a sort of a deceptive way. That is, we have these numbers and people are amazed by the numbers and say, well, they must be correct in their interpretation. But the numbers aren't actually giving them that interpretation. That's sort of been my argument. The numbers are there and they're a witness and they're correct, but the interpretation isn't drawn from that logically. There's no logical connection, in my view, to put Trump back into power based upon any of these numbers or spans of time, or to say that the pandemic now is going to develop into a Sunday law, in some kind of a direct way. Okay, so any final thoughts there, Dwight, or anyone else?
Not at this point, not from me.
Okay. Okay, do you want to close with prayer then?
Sure. Gracious Father in heaven, there is much light that is being presented. There is much that we are seeing within these symbols. We ask, Father, for your guidance so that we may correctly divide the word of truth, to understand that which is important for us at this day. I thank you for those that have participated in all that was being addressed today. I thank you for those that have attended and that may view this later. Help us now as we prepare to go through our day for all of the things that you would have us to do so that your character is shown to those with whom we come in contact. For this we thank you, for this we praise you. In all ways and in all things, in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.